The Botanist's Heart by Harper Elwood. The gentle clinking of delicate china echoed through the conservatory as Elizabeth Ashworth carefully set down her teacup. Sunlight streamed through the glass panels, casting a warm glow over the lush greenery that surrounded her. It was the spring of 1862, and at 25 years old, Elizabeth found solace among her beloved plants, far from the matchmaking schemes of London society. Her fingers, calloused from years of tending to her garden, absently stroked the leather-bound notebook that never left her side. Inside were meticulous drawings and notes on the various specimens she had collected over the years. To most of society, her passion for botany was seen as an odd eccentricity for a lady of her standing. But to Elizabeth, it was her life's work. The sound of approaching footsteps broke through her reverie. Elizabeth looked up to see Mrs. Holloway, the housekeeper, standing in the doorway with an expression of mild exasperation. "Miss Elizabeth, I've been looking all over for you," Mrs. Holloway said, her tone a mixture of fondness and frustration. "Your father wishes to see you in his study immediately." Elizabeth suppressed a sigh. These summons from her father rarely went well. "Thank you, Mrs. Holloway. I'll go to him at once." As she made her way through the grand hallways of Ashworth Manor, Elizabeth's mind raced with possibilities. Had her father finally lost patience with her unladylike pursuits? Was this to be yet another lecture on the importance of securing a suitable match? She knocked softly on the heavy oak door of her father's study. "Enter," came the gruff reply. Lord Richard Ashworth sat behind his massive desk, his salt and pepper hair neatly combed, his expression unreadable. "Ah, Elizabeth, do sit down." Elizabeth perched on the edge of a leather armchair, her back straight, hands folded in her lap. "You wish to see me, father?" Lord Ashworth nodded, his piercing blue eyes, so like her own, studying her face. "Yes, I've received a letter from an old acquaintance of mine, Professor Harold Whitmore of Cambridge. He's embarking on a botanical expedition to the Scottish Highlands this summer and is in need of an assistant." Elizabeth's heart began to race. Could it be possible? Her father continued, "Normally, I wouldn't even consider such a thing. A young lady traipsing about the wilderness. Preposterous. But," he paused, his expression softening slightly, "I know how much your studies mean to you. And Harold is a good man, a true gentleman. If you wish to go, you have my blessing." For a moment, Elizabeth was speechless. This was beyond her wildest dreams. "Father, I thank you. Yes, of course I wish to go." A smile played at the corners of Lord Ashworth's mouth. "Very well. I'll write to Harold and make the arrangements. You'll leave in a fortnight?" As Elizabeth left her father's study, she felt as though she could fly. Finally, a chance to put her knowledge to use, to explore and discover. Little did she know that this expedition would change her life in ways she could never have imagined. 2 weeks later, Elizabeth found herself in a rattling carriage, heading north towards the Scottish border. Her trunks were packed with sensible clothes, her precious notebooks, and all manner of scientific equipment. As the rolling hills gave way to more rugged terrain, excitement bubbled up inside her. The carriage eventually pulled up to a small inn on the outskirts of a quaint village. As Elizabeth stepped down, smoothing her travel-worn skirts, she caught sight of a tall figure striding towards her. "Miss Ashworth, I presume?" The man's voice was deep and warm, with a hint of a Scottish burr. Elizabeth looked up and into the most striking pair of green eyes she had ever seen. The man before her was young, perhaps in his early 30s, with unruly dark hair and a neatly trimmed beard. His clothes were well-made but functional, clearly chosen for the expedition ahead. "Why yes," Elizabeth managed, mentally shaking herself. "And you must be Professor Whitmore." The man's eyes crinkled as he smiled. "Ah, no, Professor Whitmore was unfortunately called away on urgent business. I'm Dr. Alexander Mackenzie, his colleague. I'll be leading the expedition in his stead." Elizabeth felt a momentary pang of disappointment, quickly replaced by curiosity. "I see. It's a pleasure to meet you, Dr. Mackenzie. I look forward to working with you." As they shook hands, Elizabeth couldn't help but notice the strength in his grip, the calluses that spoke of a man who was no stranger to field work. Perhaps this change in plans wasn't so unfortunate after all. Over the next few days, as they made their final preparations and began their journey into the Highlands, Elizabeth found herself continually surprised by Dr. Mackenzie. He was brilliant, of course his knowledge of botany rivaled her own. But he was also kind, patient, and possessed a dry wit that often had her stifling laughter. More than that, he treated her as an equal. When she shared her theories on plant adaptation in harsh climates, he listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and offering his own insights. In the evenings, as they pored over maps and specimens by lamplight, Elizabeth felt a growing warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the flickering flames. One afternoon, about a week into their expedition, they came across a secluded glen filled with wildflowers Elizabeth had never seen before. As she knelt to examine a particularly vibrant bloom, she felt Dr. Mackenzie's presence beside her. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said softly, his voice filled with wonder. "Nature's artistry never ceases to amaze me." Elizabeth looked up at him, struck by the passion in his eyes. "It's breathtaking," she agreed, unsure if she was speaking of the flowers or the man beside her. As the days turned to weeks, Elizabeth and Alexander grew closer. They shared stories of their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Elizabeth told him of the pressure she felt to conform to society's expectations, while Alexander spoke of his struggle to be taken seriously in academic circles due to his humble origins. Their days were filled with scientific discovery and intellectual debate. Elizabeth marveled at the way Alexander's mind worked, always questioning, always seeking to understand the world around them on a deeper level. She found herself opening up to him in ways she never had with anyone before, sharing her hopes and dreams for a future where women could pursue their passions without censure. Alexander, in turn, was captivated by Elizabeth's brilliance and determination. He admired the way she approached each challenge with unwavering resolve. Whether it was scaling a steep hillside to reach a rare specimen or arguing her point in a heated discussion about plant taxonomy. One evening, as they sat by the campfire after a long day of exploration, Alexander turned to Elizabeth with a serious expression. "Lizzie," he said, using the nickname that had slipped out one day and stuck, "I hope you know how much I value your contributions to this expedition. Your insights, your dedication, they're remarkable." Elizabeth felt a blush creep up her cheeks. "Thank you, Alex. That means a great deal coming from you." He reached out, hesitantly taking her hand in his. "I've never met anyone quite like you before. You're brilliant, passionate, and utterly fearless. I find myself quite in awe of you." Elizabeth's heart thundered in her chest. "Alex, I." But before she could finish, a crack of thunder split the air. Within moments, the sky opened up, drenching them in a sudden downpour. Laughing, they scrambled to save their equipment and notes, the moment broken but not forgotten. As the weeks passed, Elizabeth and Alexander's relationship deepened, blossoming into something neither of them had anticipated. They found themselves stealing glances at one another across the campfire, their hands brushing accidentally as they worked side by side. The beauty of the Highlands seemed to pale in comparison to the growing attraction between them. One particularly challenging day, as they struggled to navigate a treacherous mountain path, Alexander reached out to steady Elizabeth as she lost her footing. His strong arms encircled her waist, pulling her close to prevent her from falling. For a moment, they stood frozen, their faces mere inches apart, hearts racing for more than just the exertion of the climb. "Lizzie," Alexander breathed, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know what I would do if anything happened to you." Elizabeth gazed up at him, lost in the depths of his green eyes. "Alex, she began, but once again, words failed her. Instead, she reached up, gently cupping his cheek in her hand. The tension between them was palpable, electric. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, Elizabeth thought Alexander might kiss her. But then, with a shaky breath, he stepped back, ever the gentleman. We should keep moving," he said, his voice rough. "There's a storm coming." Elizabeth nodded, trying to ignore the disappointment that settled in her chest. As they continued their climb, she couldn't help but wonder if she had imagined the longing in Alexander's eyes. As their expedition neared its end, Elizabeth found herself dreading the return to civilization. She had never felt so alive, so true to herself, as she did here in the wilderness with Alexander by her side. The thought of returning to London, to the stifling expectations of society, filled her with a sense of loss she couldn't quite articulate. On their last night in the Highlands, they stood together on a hillside, watching the sun set over the misty mountains. The sky was ablaze with colors, vivid oranges and pinks fading into deep purples, a fitting finale to their extraordinary journey. Alexander turned to her, his expression earnest. "Lizzie, I know we come from different worlds. I can't offer you the life of luxury you're accustomed to, but these past weeks have shown me that I never want to be parted from you. You challenge me, inspire me, make me want to be a better man. If you'll have me, I'd like to court you properly when we return." Elizabeth felt tears in her eyes. "Oh, Alex, I don't want luxury or society's approval. I want this, the joy of discovery, the freedom to pursue my passions. And I want you by my side through it all." As Alexander pulled her into his arms, Elizabeth knew that her life would never be the same. They would face challenges, certainly, raised eyebrows from society, disapproval from her father, the struggles of building a life that bridged their two worlds. But as she tilted her face up to meet Alexander's kiss, she knew that together they could weather any storm. Their first kiss was tender, tentative, filled with the promise of all that was to come. As they broke apart, both breathless and flushed, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. "My darling Lizzie," he murmured, "you've bewitched me, body and soul." Elizabeth smiled, her heart soaring. "And you, my dear Alex, have shown me a world I never dared to dream of." The journey back to London was bittersweet. As the rugged beauty of the Highlands gave way to the rolling countryside of England, Elizabeth felt as though she were leaving a part of herself behind. But with Alexander by her side, his hand often finding hers when no one was looking, she felt a new sense of purpose and excitement for the future. Upon their return, society buzzed with gossip about the impropriety of a young lady embarking on such an expedition. But Elizabeth paid them no mind. She threw herself into writing up their findings, working alongside Alexander to prepare their research for publication. Lord Ashworth, to Elizabeth's surprise and relief, gave his blessing to their courtship. Perhaps he saw the way his daughter's eyes lit up when she spoke of their discoveries, and of Alexander. Or perhaps he simply recognized the futility of standing in the way of such a determined pair. In the months that followed, Elizabeth and Alexander's love deepened and grew. They attended lectures and scientific exhibitions together, their spirited debates the talk of academic circles. Alexander encouraged Elizabeth to submit her own papers for publication, standing proudly by her side as she presented her findings to the Royal Botanical Society. Their courtship was unconventional by society's standards, but neither of them would have had it any other way. Stolen kisses in the Kew Gardens greenhouse, long walks discussing the intricacies of plant biology, evenings spent planning future expeditions, this was the stuff of Elizabeth's dreams. 1 year to the day after their first meeting, Alexander proposed properly. He took Elizabeth back to the conservatory where their story had begun, going down on one knee among the lush foliage. "Elizabeth Ashworth," he said, his voice trembling slightly as he presented a ring adorned with a delicate flower-shaped diamond. "You have brought more beauty and wonder into my life than all the rare plants we've discovered together. Will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears of joy streaming down her face, Elizabeth pulled Alexander to his feet. "Yes," she breathed, 1,000 times, "yes." Their wedding, held in the gardens of Ashworth Manor, was a celebration of not just their love, but of the passion for knowledge and discovery that had brought them together. Rare specimens from their expedition decorated the tables, and their vows included promises to always support each other's scientific pursuits. As Elizabeth and Alexander Mackenzie set off on their honeymoon, another botanical expedition, of course, she knew that their greatest adventure was just beginning. Together they would explore not just the far corners of the world, but the depths of their love for each other, and for the natural wonders that surrounded them. Their love, like the rare flowers they had discovered together, would bloom against all odds, nurtured by mutual respect, shared passion, and the unbreakable bond forged in the wilds of the Scottish Highlands. And as they journeyed through life hand in hand, Elizabeth knew that she had found something far more precious than any scientific discovery, a love as vast and untamed as the Highlands themselves.